Alrighty, let's see whether we have anything. This is going to be a experience because it's been a while. I don't have audio on. Hey, I'm live or something. I don't have an ability to see what people are doing very easily. So bear with me while I try to make all of this actually work, because that's a big question as to whether any of it's going to work. And I'm going to try to set it up so that I can see anybody on stream. We might start and stop this with great rapidity because the way it's set up is not maybe optimal. But then there might also be things I can do about that. It was going to be hey Pathlick, a stream. I need to move this over to, oh God, what am I even logged into over here? So if I do this and then I pop out chat, it still lets me. It does. Stream. Hey. Then at least I can have some of that going on. What am I even logged into over here? Well, can we close this window? Kind of. Okay, so this is a poorer version of what I was doing. And we're gonna, hey Scarig, very poor streaming quality too. Okay, I know I need to make this go away. So this might be quite a thing. I should be able to do here more streaming tools, which did not work. I plugged this in and nothing happened, but I'll put that away later because my intention was to do a coding stream, and that will involve me showing this screen. And my microphone is working, so although I don't know how loud it is, I think it's kind of faint. My light is all green today. That's the color that I use for the coding streams, because this is what my coding laptop looks like. I was just in the middle of futzing around with these things. I can do the camera, and I was busily trying to make all of this stuff work again. It's been a long time since it's been in action and nothing actually works. Also, I can't see chat until I switch back, so because I wasn't able to make OBS log into YouTube properly, so I had to provide a stream key directly and blah 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 blah. And it's getting cold, but I have a fire going. That's why there's a little bit of light over there. You'll notice with the green look, that is in fact green things, because you can see that there's a red mouse, and in fact I can even fool around with light in other ways if I wish. Just stuff that I've built up over the years of learning to do this kind of thing. So, and I can also turn on the modulars for an additional bit of amusement, because that will make lights that are not green. So there you go, that's fun to look at. But it's going to be a very small picture because we're going to switch over to the coding stream. And also, I'm fussing with things a little bit. For instance, I have this view thing going on. It's not really working very well for me. And hey, Mel. Hey, well, thank you about the video on Verbity too. Like, as you know, I work on all of these things, and the Verbity 2 video is a nice little 4K. If you're interested in the cinema side of things, I put a lot of effort and time into that. I'd be more than happy to tell you about that. But for now, let me gear up with the coding stream. As you can see, I'm going to be working in here, but I wanted to also have the camera showing up somewhere. Maybe what I should do to start is pick something and get ready to do it, and then find where my picture is going to go. Because, oh hey, now I'm this big. So one of the things that I was not able to do was I was not able to figure out how to rescale and crop the camera feed. I wanted to do this, I did not succeed in doing it. So I started streaming anyway, because the hey. But I can actually partially crop that by just sliding it off the end of the screen. Does anybody know how to crop off the edges of... The last time I tried, I broke the stream and had to reboot the entire computer as well as OBS, so Transform. Edit transform. That's something I could do. Wait, that's not the right one. Everything scoots over to the side a little tiny bit. That was the wrong transform. This is going to be the transform I want to edit. Let's see whether we can make some of this stuff happen. We're all in this together. It is a mess, but it's my mess. And the hey, whatever. And if I do this, I can be very patient, and eventually it will get to where I need it to be. What happens if I do this? Oh God. What's that about? Oh no. Positional alignment. Top right. Okay, that's weird. Code reveal. Hey Shangex. Yeah, I used to do this. I'm going to start doing it again. It's just taking literally forever to get this sorted out, because none of this nonsense makes sense anymore. And the way that I have to manipulate any of these things is really slow and stupid. For instance, that wasn't supposed to happen. See, this will probably remember what I had set up, so it's probably going to remember. So although you can't see this very well, you can see some of the code, I guess. I wonder if I can... I hurt my arm, so I can't actually do this very well. it's letting me move things at a snail's pace, so we're just going to move things at a snail's pace for a moment. And I'd like to be able to see the YouTube chat, so why don't I try to scooch this over and then go back to edit transform. And now I can see what Mel said, learning from how to do it. I used to display chat on the window. I can't do that anymore. I had to do it with go into restream.io, and it cost me a bunch of money. I can't afford to do that any longer. And I'm not going to be affording it any longer, because I will tell you right now, if I'm able to earn money again, it's going to go towards audio stuff. In particular, there is no reason why it would be noisy. I don't know what you mean. Although, actually, no, I do have an idea. That could be the way that the sound persists. Are you like trying to put silence into it? Because it has a darkening quality. If you set it to 0 mulch, see whether that changes it. Because mulch works by using the chrome oxide algorithm. And the chrome oxide algorithm does use noise. And it's using the noise to manage the frequencies. That's a dumb way of explaining it, but it's the best I can do. Let's start cropping this some too. Oh, our screen is moving so slowly, but we're gonna manage. We'll manage as well as we can. Be patient with me while I sit around with these dumb screens and video things and stuff. Professional streamers can do this all much better, but I mean, at least I have a microphone up and cameras and all of this nonsense, so we'll do the best we can with what we've got. That's all we can do. And we're going to crop in right a little bit as well. I do have my fire going a little bit, so at least I won't be as cold. I'm going to take a moment to peek at main scene. Okay, so the settings that I'm doing are per scene, and that's useful to know. Let's go back to this. They kind of would have to be per scene, honestly. So yeah, what's happening is probably the chrome oxide code. I can show it to you in a moment once I finish doing this nonsense with the stream. And mulch should affect that. So you should be able to cut down the amount of noise and extremely long sustains by attenuating the mulch setting. If you have it to 0, it probably shouldn't do that anymore, although I'm not sure whether, because that's the thing, is the chrome oxide is doing that in order to simulate a more realistic reverb tail. Yeah, a fireplace in my room, this room that you see me in. Let's use, what I'm doing is using the edit transform in OBS, and like I hurt my arm somehow, so I can't actually lift it very well, and so reaching up and messing with the typing in new things isn't actually working great. I wonder whether, I probably can't click on it and drag it around. It wasn't letting me do that before. It was clicking through to the other thing and moving that, so that's useless. The many useless things. Let's move this to where it's in a useful place. That will do. In fact, I'm quite willing to crop it off of the screen just a little bit. I can also rotate, but the way this is going, it would move so slowly that we certainly don't want to do that. But I am like cropping in a little bit anyhow, and there's that. And then after God knows how many hours of fussing around with this stream stuff, is bear in mind, like, when you do things like this, if you're not doing like big time YouTuber money, you're pretty much stuck figuring it all out yourself. And that's the situation I'm in, is having to figure the stuff all out myself. So there we are. Ta-da! And so that's my coding overlay. OBS will presumably remember this stuff if I remember how it's set up. And so there's that. And if I don't have to like debug, fix, and constantly reinvent everything every single week, I can return to it more easily. And there are some things, actually. You mentioned the fireplace in the studio bit. Well, I have some features to my studio stuff for when I start actually doing music streams. Just camera turns. That thing that stuff is leaning on is the isolation cap of my recent video. That is a Farfisa and a Rhodes and my guitar pedals, but I can also... Wouldn't it be fun if I had that on a machine that rotated? We do indeed have a fireplace in the studio, so I will show you when I put wood in. We're going to put another chunk of wood in right now. This could be part of the stream. I was just over at a Bed Bath & Beyond in Keene, where I go, and it was going out of business. And one of the things that they had was these giant wall clocks that included thermometers. And I did not go and buy the wall clock, but I thought about it because I could put it up behind me over there. And let's see whether we've got this aligned properly. Kind of, sort of, maybe, no? Here. So now our video streaming also includes rotating the camera, and that's something that I can do fairly easily. So future possibilities do involve, well, motion might not go away entirely, because bear in mind, if you have, you could try original verbity, or indeed Galactic. There's lots of plugins that I make, but the thing is, even back in the days of Matrix Verb and Reverb, I was making reverbs and trying to simulate what the sounds are when you make a noise in an acoustic space and it dies away into a more noise-like sound. So if you need an extended reverb that doesn't have that sort of rush of air and background sound, you might want to choose a more artificial reverb rather than something that is actually natural sounding. All depends. It all depends. And of course, now that I'm working with, because the banks of delay units is not what's causing that. So it remains possible to do one where it has the same like texture that Verbity has, but it doesn't have to include the chrome oxide technology for darkening the reverb decays. Because that's what's happening. That's why that's going. I'm honestly a little surprised. I think I will wait and see what people think. I did it that way on purpose, so it's a choice, and there are many other reverbs I have made, so I could do other ones, but right now we're talking about something else. Right now we're not talking about revising Verbity unless hordes of people pop up and all demand the same thing, in which case sometimes I listen. But being able to make a ultra pure one that doesn't have that going on, it's possible, and that's not something I'm going to do today, because I did Verbity to do a number of specific things, and it gets the sound that I want for the plugin that I put out today. I mean, look at how many channels there are. It's not unthinkable that there would be that many Verbities if I can come up with enough, like, here, so check this out. One of the things that I'm thinking about is if I can get the Patreon thing back up, because it's deteriorated over the last year. I simply wasn't able to put enough effort into my work over the last year. You know how I did a reward thing and got a ASR 10 keyboard and decided that I was not going to be able to get that really classic, I can't remember what the name of it, SP1200. I was not going to ever be able to get an SP1200 because it is too expensive. So I'm not going to be able to study or mimic an SP1200 because it's too expensive, because I can't have it. But being able to get an ASR 10 turned out to be something that I could do. And I got it. That's one of the things I'm going to be working on in one of these videos. One of these Mondays, I will whip out the ASR 10. It will sit over where the Summit is, and I'll be sampling stuff off with the record player behind you, probably using things that are that you could do React channel stuff with, so that I could sample and fool around with a actual record in that record collection, and we can work with it like that. But as far as scaling other things up, in particular as far as reverbs are concerned, what I would probably want to do is update the reverb in my rack here, which is a MIDI verb. And if I get back into music making, which right now this is just talking about problems and bugs and things and trying to fix issues. First stream back with the hay in a long time. But what I'm going to be doing is live music or music making in this studio with like the Heritage Audio mixer and analog mix, and you'll be hearing what comes back into the system to be captured, because I have a whole other wire, and in fact under this panel is hidden a not hidden, you can know it's there, is a second Mo2 interface, one of the ones that I did for when I was testing drum sounds through a wide variety of affordable interfaces. That is another video that I made, so you can hear what a bunch of different interfaces sound like, and that lives on my channel. I did the whole video and uploaded it at like ProRes and uncompressed audio so that you have the best possible chance of hearing what this stuff actually sounds like. And the little Mo2 that I got is one of the ones for that purpose. And I put it back into service. It's tucked under there, and it's the aux or tape outputs on the Heritage. And I can pipe the output of that board into recapturing into the computer for capturing the analog mix, and also piping it into this streaming computer so I can run that into the audio, essentially letting you listen to the output of the board, like literally the output of the board, at which point I'll have to talk to you through a microphone in the plugged into the actual studio. But when I do that, that means I can like swivel the camera over, get a guitar sound, play one of my guitars, plug in one of my guitars using a real amp, and play that track into probably be Reaper, and it feels like that. Go upstairs, turn on the drum microphones. I don't have a camera up there right now, and I'm not necessarily going to have one, but run upstairs and like lay down a drum track live while streaming in the studio, and then work with it. So that could get more interesting and fun. Back in the day, what I was able to do live streaming was basically just only doing a live performance into the desk and capturing it as a 2-track master. I don't necessarily have to do that now because I've come up with a way. I've set up the setup so that I can fire up Reaper and then capture the multi-tracks and do my overdubbing and stuff while using the same system that I used to make Welcome to Free Luna, the album that I put out. Because the thing about that was that let me start actually making music, because I didn't have to do the arrangement and all of that stuff all at once. Instead, it was make a jam, make some cool music, and make a jam, make some cool music, get it down on 2-track, and then edit it into stuff. That's the same technique that they used in some of the progressive rock music that I've always enjoyed. Yes, notably, a lot of Eddie Offord. Eddie Offord was the engineer for Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And he liked doing that. He would edit together multi-track tapes or 2-track tapes, all he wanted. And it turns out to be a really powerful way to get through creative blocks and start actually putting music together. And I can do that with multi-tracking rather than just jamming with the modular. So yeah, once I have the streaming thing up and running, and I can probably put this back on battery again for a little while. Install an API. I'm not going to have an API desk. I might be able to model that Heritage Audio. That's going to act a little bit more like a Neve or like one of the classic really old desks that some of the great, like Led Zeppelin 2 was neither an API nor a Neve nor an SSL or any of that stuff. Led Zeppelin 2 was this monstrous old Trident thing in which they didn't even have pan pots. Sometimes that's really powerful. You don't necessarily want to pick like a fancy post-70s expensive desk. If you want to do post-70s, you probably want to... Oh, also, when I get back into, or when I get into doing VCV rack stuff, to be able to do that kind of thing and show people how to do modular synthesis in a way that they can actually do, I will be actually taking the modular synthesizer of VCV rack and running it through the analog board. When I do that, that's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to take the VCV rack and run it through that rather than incorporating console into the VCV rack thing, which you can do because now, thanks to Bacon Paul, now you have all the Airwindows plugins, including today's, as a VCV rack module. I have linked to it on my website, and we'll be making a post about that too. Florian Angerer has a question. Me and a colleague have been trying to integrate Console 8 into a fifth order ambisonics mix. You're going to want a U in Reaper, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. I'm pretty sure... What? Hang on. I will look it up for you. Let's go and find out. Coding stream. So, that's what I'm going to start working with. But, let's go have a quick look, shall we? Console 8. So what we're looking at is my entire library. This is what just got put into VCV Rack. Me and Bacon Paul are also going to work on, although this doesn't require that much of me, but it comes very naturally to him, so it's just a matter of finding time for it. Console 8, let's use a Console 8 sub, or no, not a sub. Let's do the bus and see whether that has anything. So what we're going to look for is, here's our code. I don't know how easy it is to read, but at the moment I don't have the chat going over everything, which screws everything up. So maybe that's just how it's going to be, is that we're not going to include chat on the stream, but we're going to include the text of this stuff on the stream, and it's in large enough print that you might actually be able to read it. Here's the process method, and this is what gets called every sample buffer. Like when you're setting up a DAW and you tell it to have like a 256 or a 512 or 128 buffer in order to get different kinds of latency, like you go, hey, yeah, these are things that are in process. You don't get to work with any of this stuff that I'm working on, but you do get to see stuff like that when you're in the Airwindows coding stream. You get to get a little peek at stuff that's going to happen. And yep, this is what I'm going to be doing. Some of this stuff is what I'm going to be doing, and I'll tell you why. But first, I am answering a question. Why wouldn't this work? So, the process kernel is how this works. You will notice that we have this stuff up at the top saying things like get parameter param1. That's how this stuff works. I'll try to answer questions about this kind of thing. And then we go to when n sample frames is larger than 0. This is how we process the buffer. It says double input sample equals source P. What happens in audio units that doesn't happen in VSTs is that audio units, or at least the ones that I coded that aren't specifically for stereo, and that's why I was checking, are what's called N2N. N2N means you can run a mono thing, and it'll only run one instance of the processing, which I feel like the VSTs are always set up to be stereo, and so you're always running twice as much processing as you need half the time. I don't really like that, but they seem to work well enough. N2N audio units can do a single source, or if you have a stereo thing, it will automatically run two of these in parallel, and then you'll have dual mono. That's also how some of the reverbs work. For instance, Verbity 2 is not like that. Verbity 2 is, we're going to go back to Mac AU. Here's Verbity and Verbity 2. So here is the one that came out today. And you will notice that there's all this code here. And then the input, it says input sample L and input sample R. And that is a stereo plugin. In fact, we've got a little thing up here, and it says supported num channels, and it claims that it can only support 2 channels in and 2 channels out. Whereas Verbity like I said, verbity dual mono. And verbity is just input sample. It is end-to-end. That also means, here's getting to the actual answer to the question, that also means that it will do quad, it will do 5.1, all the end-to-end plugins, all the ones where it's set up to do this, and the supported number of channels is not specified. What's going to happen there is that it will run in any number of channels you like. So when answering the question from Florian about into a fifth order ambisonics mix, ambisonics probably means heavily multi-channel. I don't know exactly how many channels ambisonics has, but here's the thing. If it can use audio units on a heavily multi-channel mix, it should be one of the plugins that will just work, and it should be available, and Console 8 should work. You would want to use the same number of, like, one of the things about this that you see here, we see Console 8 light channel and light bus, C-strip 2, PAF 92, one that I call weight that I was going to work on today, sample delay, and a thing called Slew Sonic. These are all the same. All of these just say gain, and I have not begun to do the VSTing of any of these. Oh, 36 channels? Well, if the end-to-end scales up to that, you should be able to just try it, and unless there is some other problem, it should just work. That's assuming that the 36 channel mix is capable of instantiating an audio unit plugin and giving it that many inputs. So I don't see a reason why that wouldn't work, but try it and see. If that doesn't work, then I can't help you. I'm making the end-to-end plugins. Audio units are capable of doing that. If that's beyond what generic audio units can do, then I can't help you. But if it does do it, then all of the audio units that are end-to-end, maybe I should go and put that in my website. That'll be a really large amount of work to do. Would be able to handle it. Let me try it and let me know if it works, is what I'm going to tell you. Because if you let me know that that works, I can come back, turn around, and well, no, all of the Console 8s are going to be end-to-end. And they're, what is, it's a cool sounding name, Slew Sonic, huh? Well, all that means is I want to do a version of Slew only that is ultrasonic filtered. Because I've done Slew only and I do the ultrasonic filtering, and my assumption is that since it is a very primitive form of filtering, it shouldn't do like aliasing or any of that stuff. But I'm not sure. I need to try it. I need to experiment and find out. And that's one thing that I'm not going to be able to do today because we have no way of hearing the output of any of this. A debug session? That's weird. I only put out one version of Console 8. Oh, if the feeder attenuates all channels, then it works. You're good to go. And that means everything that is end-to-end will also work on your ambisonics mix, which might come in handy. That's a lot of plugins to work for your ambisonic mix. It's a lot of choice that you have. One of the things that Bacon Paul was always very enthusiastic about is he likes the way that many of my plugins, you can do things like look up the editing of controls and things and write scripts to, like the VCV rack thing. It brings in descriptions from Airwindopedia. It's doing things like scaling controls and stuff, and that's because the way of doing a thing, like taking a control and making it match an AU control set up to be -1 to +1, that's one of the things that's going to go on when I start working on weight, in fact, is, since it's taking forever to get around to this, let's go back to, since the plugins are extremely regular in design, it makes it possible for somebody like Paul to script things and have them, he gets to include stuff and have it run the script and just work for just enormous numbers of plugins. And for that reason, if he has an observation, it's not always been the case, but going forward in particular, if he wants to try something like, oh, hey, Angel, if he wants to try something like, I want to implement this in the plugin that I'm now doing, and 2 of your plugins don't use the same code for doing this one thing, and so I have to write special cases, I have expressed a willingness to go in and, much like amending my reverb, my random generation, where I was using something that blocked threads on Linux, so Linux people were finding stuff unusable. I needed to roll my own reverb, my random generation. I'm willing to go through all of the hundreds of plugins and update everything if I can come up with something that will make Paul's job easier. And I've done this repeatedly and will continue to do that going forwards if I identify stuff where I can put in like days or weeks of work on something in the whole code base that'll make it more convenient. Because that's the thing, is a lot of people are like, I invented a way of coding better, and so therefore the plugins that I'm doing from now on have the new thing, and then the other, I'm not going to deal with the old stuff because I don't care. And they end up with programming where they're very clever and they've come up with a new way of doing things, but then if anybody wants to work with all of their library, it's a giant pile of work. Whereas the way that I do and maintain stuff means that if I am doing things and you come up with a way of scripting it, so it's like, I'm going to generate a let's label all the controls in my thing. Well, that doesn't actually count because the VST already lets you do that. But here's a good example. Here's what we did in the VCV. And it was an example of Paul did a bunch of stuff and I did a bunch of stuff to cover for it. Paul wanted to build menus in the Airwindows VCV plugin. And they do exist. So what happened was he's starting to do this and going, I can make menus out of this, but if I had access to your Airwindopedia thing, I could, as far as the VCV rack thing, don't expect the library version to get every single update. That's why I'm directing people to where you get the dailies. Paul only has to push one button and it generates everything. So, hang on a second. I believe I'm getting a package.
Very good, John. Have a good day. You too.
I'm back. Oh, it's not a spy, it's in the base. This is a guy that I've seen many times. He's the UPS guy. Did I tell you about subharmonic generation? So if I'm not mistaken, yep. 102 Yeovil Road, United Kingdom. This is a box from the UK. It's a very specific thing. And I was expecting it tomorrow, not today. Oh, Cody, there is somebody working on that. It's not going to be directly. Well, if the guy from doing the thing to Cardinal has stuff that he needs from me to amend the whole code base, then I'm game to work with him. Probably that's not going to be necessary. But there's a separate person trying to support Cardinal. That is because Paul prefers to directly support a actively underway open source project rather than supporting a branch that is specifically there to supplant and take away the original project. I agree, because future work, whether you like it or not, going on in the VCV Rack project is going to come from and be controlled by the person who invented the thing. Like big projects like this or the Airwindows codebase. See, understand, I am more like Andrew Belt than I am like the people who are trying to do a friendlier and more welcoming version of VCV Rack in Cardinal. And that's what that is. It's not a technological update so much as it is a social update attempting to replace the community of the VCV Rack project. But the VCV Rack project is mostly Andrew Belt. And you can't really just swap him out. That doesn't happen any more than you could do a hostile fork of all of Airwindows. It's only MIT licensed stuff. And then what you could do is try to come up with a new plugin every week without me. Kind of good luck there. It's a similar situation with VCV Rack. Like, working with that team of people, you kind of have to work with them their way. And it's not necessarily going to be friendly for everybody. By contrast, you can work with the Surge synthesizer, and it's much more friendly and open and cheerful. Cardinal is an alternate way of getting involved with a modular synthesizer open source project. I'll just put it that way. I don't know whether if it was really a straight up exactly the same, then it would work with the new plugin for Airwindows support directly. That's apparently not the case, so I will happily, to the extent that I can, help out anybody who's trying to further extend it to support Cardinal. But I'm not going to lay off supporting VCV Rack directly. Both me and Paul find that it is possible to work with the VCV Rack folks, and that's largely Andrew Bell's project, much like Airwindows is me. And so you kind of learn how to do it. And Rack, VCV Rack is also open source. It's handled and licensed in a particular way where there's a free version and there's an open source version, and then if you want to run it as a plugin, that becomes a whole other thing. This is because Andrew Belt does not want to be as poverty-stricken as me. Now that is a whole interesting question, because it's like, let me open this box and show you. Basically, there are some things that I can do because it's a business. And that means if I want to, I can reinvest into the business and get stuff that's directly related to audio and directly related to things that I'm going to do. And I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. Oh, look, an invoice. Oh, look, a bunch of copies of the invoice. Interesting. And I think this is a UK paper size. We're going to show you what the Christmas present is. And I'm going to tell you what the plan is. There's a further boxes. Some of these things I use as kindling for the wood stove. I don't know whether this is going to qualify. You know, they've done a pretty thorough job of packaging everything, although I don't think he has the original Doepfer box. And this plastic does not get... and also, you are warned that you had better have a fold-up case for this. And it's just more packaging. And we got a lot of bubble wrap. My arm is going to continue to hurt from throwing this tape and stuff around. It'll eventually heal up. I'm too old to do the kind of exercises that I do. I lift weights, and sometimes that's not a great idea. I added a new level of the lifting weights where I take a 30-pound weight and I lift it up into the air 30 times, and I upgraded it to a 35-pound weight, but I'm at a strain something doing that. So we just bounced over to packaging and receiving. When you're in actual business, you hire somebody to do that. That's the first thing that I ever did in professional music. Was I briefly worked as packaging and receiving for Fishman transducers. I got fired. I was not good enough at doing that. I was like 18 or something. I worked as packaging, receiving, inventory, and stockroom for Fishman transducers and got fired for it because I was no good at it. But before then, I got to see the prototype of the Parker Fly guitar because that guy is a friend of Larry Fishman. And I think I got to see the prototype of it, and I was like, oh, I don't like it as well as my Strat. That's pretty funny. This is a Doepfer A113 subharmonic generator. It's a sort of sawtooth oscillator. You drive it off of a high note as a square wave, and it gives you this many subdivisions in a really interesting tone. And the purpose of that, I've asked whether there's like VCV racks versions of it or whatever, and I'm not sure there is. But the purpose of this whole thing, this elaborate computer, is to make chords, sort of sawtooth wave chords, in which all the notes are a sawtooth wave that is a subdivision of this high note that gets fed in as a square. So you can have a 2 and a 4 and an 8 or whatever, but you can also have odd numbers like 3s and 5s and stuff, and that gives you sort of a sub major or minor third is the one I'm particularly interested in, that is not equal temperament. You wind up with harmonics and subharmonics that have this sort of strange, compelling tone meshing of, I can't describe it. I'm not going to be able to plug this in on stream. Or if I was, I wouldn't be able to actually hear the result. And I'm not sure it fits into the top A of this. Oh god, it totally doesn't, but it'll fit into the bottom. It'll go in there, or possibly in the middle. Yeah, it could probably fit in the middle. Might be a better idea. And then I could do a number of things with it. One of them is do modular jams where instead of the stuff I'm doing, I can fire up a chord, like, integer divisions of the frequency. And I can fire up chords that are unusually, weirdly harmonious in a bizarre way to the key that I'm in. And sort of set that up and tune it appropriately. There's a number of ways I can go about it. It'll be kind of fun to get into that. It'll be like a very fun work day as opposed to coding streams. And then you'll have like dub techno chords kind of things, cool sounding stuff to go into your filters and echoes and whatever. And yeah. I've got Dope clock dividers up there where I could in fact feed in square waves and get 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 and 8 as simultaneous like subdivisions. So I've got some clock dividers that'll do exactly that, but that'll give me square waves. The Dope for A113 subharmonic generator generates sawtooth waves and mixes them. It'll also give you single outs, but it will mix them. And that's going to be an interesting tone. I'm definitely going to get an album at least out of this. One of the people I've been listening to musically is a young. It's another furry, but it's a young lady that is like a infant, an egg compared to me, old cat. By the name of Patricia Taxon, and I've been listening to Patricia Taxon albums quite a bit. And one of the things that I kind of like is that they're typically not the same. And the albums are all very consistent. And I've already started doing stuff that kind of, like I've done a bunch of things that haven't come out on Bandcamp because I would like to have Bandcamp be stuff that's like 96K, 24-bit, really high resolution stuff for people to enjoy because that's what I like. The fact that I've done albums in the past on things like ADATs doesn't matter as much. And I'm not really about like reprocessing my old stuff. I got to move into doing new things going forward. But the neat thing about Patricia Taxon albums is that they're very creative, and the music theory is so intense that she impresses Adam Neely, and that's very cool. Like if you manage to do that, I would like to think that the stuff that I do with music theory will eventually reach Adam Neely, and he'll be like, what is this guy talking about? But Patricia Taxon, very impressive. And the albums all are pretty consistent with themselves, but then each new one gets to be a departure. It can be like a chiptune album, or it can be she said this one thing about, I hated all chiptune music until I realized that I just wanted to do an album which is like, no, you idiots, this is what chiptune is supposed to be like. And then she did, and it's pretty nice. And she can also do a ambient or a lowercase album. You have no idea. There are certain things that you will have to understand if you dive deep into Patricia Taxon. Like, there's different aesthetics. If you've heard things like Andrew Huang or Adam Neely album, I think Adam in particular did a one of those album in a day kind of things. That I don't think I'm going to be doing that, but people do that, and I would do it for money, but I don't really get money. And some of the things Adam did was work with vocalists where there's, Patricia Taxon, Taxxon, strongly recommended. But if you go back to really old albums, you will, Patricia is trans, you will get music where there's like a pop-like aesthetic. It tends to have stuff that's a lot louder than I ever like to make stuff, but some of the older stuff is like vocals that are just belted out and auto-tuned, and in various ways it's like, okay, this qualifies as far as being a relatively good vocalist. But what Patricia did going forward was dive into this sort of, like, one of the things that me and her have in common is we both have autism. My way of doing vocals is not the same way Patricia does. because she went from doing auto-tune stuff that's very production, like high production stuff, to like put up a mic, get things sounding very clear and immediate, and then perform without any auto-tune, being sort of like wonky and stuff, and allowing that human quality to predominate. And I've heard that in Adam Neely's album work as well. Like, he works with people who will sometimes do that style of vocal, who will do this style of vocal where it's like, and now I'm putting across a vibe or something, and I'm saying something really personal, and it's super not tuned, it's super not fixed. She's capable of performing in a way where things are being sung accurately or with any particular projection, but chooses to perform in a way where it's like, you call it a character voice. It is a character voice that is the character of the authentic person, but it's also being played up for that purpose. So yeah, deep dive on Patricia Taxon apparently. But that's one of the things when I was talking about being excited about getting the subharmonic generator, because I'm super pumped about plugging this in and seeing what I can get. I'm probably going to have permanent patches on the modular system that incorporate this and use it. But I think this entire thing is going to be like a Q&A, and there's going to be no actual coding done today. Maybe I'll start with some. I'll hang in with it, and we'll see where we get. I'm going to be setting this up so that it can play chords and follow what I want it to do. But then, another thing I have is this exists so that I can work with the sample libraries I'm trying to make. I'm trying to get into, either Renoise XRNS or the SFZ file format. And the main purpose of this is to plug into the laptop or whatever and be able to supply audio samples where you can have like a sampled instrument, and then you play it off of whatever controller you've got and go from there. Well, with this, I can sample stuff that I make out of it, and I could just sample a drone off of it and loop that, and then let you do your own like filtering or whatever, or envelope generating. And that would be useful. Or I can set it up with the whole analog rig and have analog filtering and do dub chords or whatever. But then the thing that I have on this mouse pad is my music theory thing, where I've worked out in a given key which chords are major or minor. If you jump to another chord, how far is it away from the key? It's the circle of fifth based stuff. Using a keyboard like this, you could have chords instead of notes. And so you'd be major or minor chords. But rather than being like, okay, minor chord all the way up from really low to really high, you could have it sitting where, your C is, here's your C minor, and here's your C major. And these octaves are, what you have available. Yeah, it's an Arturia key step. These are very available. Behringer tried to rip this off. If you have major or minor chords on the same keyboard, then you can use the lookups for this is where you want to use major, this is where you want to use minor, and start composing stuff on the back of that, and throw in the majors or minors, and then you can have samples that are not having to be constructed out of individual notes. Like, I'd like to sample my Rhodes, the electric piano, and do stuff whether either DI or through an amp or both, but go, let's have a major chord off of the Fender Rhodes. Doom. And there you go. And you sound the chord, And it is a sample directly off the Rhodes. So if you were going to do a oh, Brady, hey, yeah, absolutely. I have gotten really pumped, excited by discovering that new artist, and it's been a lot of my music listening when it's not, dub techno or whatever. See, what I feel is that I'm not able to get the sounds that I would like out of the box very easily. Generally, I can get the sounds into the computer just fine, but the more I do with them, the less well it works for me. So that means that if I am doing, say, a instrument that needs to play chords, this is also why I sampled a bunch of guitar chords. That showed up in the track Skronk that I did a while back. I never did an album like that, but I could. I could if I decided to sort of dive into it and do it the Patricia Taxon way of let's just do an album that's just like this, do a bunch of it, and then go and do something else. If I sample the whole chord into the computer, assign it to a key, and then compose stuff based on like this chord here, this chord there, but I'm hitting one note and firing one sample to play the whole chord back, I should be able to get a richer tone out of something like Renoise, out of something like an SFZ, out of something like VCV Rack, using an SFZ player or a sample player. I'm pretty sure VCV Rack makes you pay for the standard issue sample player, and it's not unthinkable that I will do that. I know that that's one of the reasons that Cardinal exists, is people got really mad at the idea of this is an open source thing, but you're making me pay for the premium modules? The hell? And it's like, yeah. Oh, hey, Jess, send some, tell us. Told the chat. The chat might have other people that code on things like this. Fibonacci related something? Because you might be talking about something that somebody told me quite a while back. I know there's a Fibonacci related reverb idea that's been floating around. In fact, if we go back over to the coding view, notes and stuff, here's notes of things that I need to do. This is where I got the idea for Verbity 2. See, Verbity is the 4x4 matrix. And using that, you don't need to do any gain changes in anything. Although remember, multiplying or dividing by 2 is a bit shift gain. And so you can do this +1 minus 1 +2 minus 2 and not hurt the tone. Same with the 6x6. The difference is that if you're doing these larger matrices, and in each case, like this is a bunch more of echo things, and this is even more than that. I don't think the factorial actually enters into it. That's a mistake, but I'm going to put another log on the fire just a moment. I wouldn't mind making another cup of coffee, but I can't point the camera to cover that. And I just assume not have more cups of coffee and just sort of work into this kind of thing. One of the problems with me doing live streams is that if I get up to the rate of firing away coding or recording stuff, and I'm really going at full crank, I will exhaust anybody keeping up. And here, let me repoint that. Oh, is that supposed to go? Let's go like this. Yeah, I'm capable of going for more hours than anybody can actually watch, and that hurts the YouTube, it hurts the streaming stuff. This came with the subharmonic generator. I bet it's screws. Yep. Rex screws for Doper, of which I am not. I have Pittsburgh Modular for the rack thing, so I have to use a different set of screws for that. That's fine. I'll keep those for something. One of the things about the wood fire is that it's sealed up real good. So it draws air from the room and it goes up the chimney. It's super not very leaky. Like it wouldn't function at all without the vent underneath it. And I have a vent very close by actually that is coming from the basement, and that's how I cool this room in summer. It coming from the basement through an insulated vent duct, and before it gets to that, I have a big old fan so it can be fan force fed, and before it gets to the fan, it goes through a long series of cinder blocks along the base of the wall. I'm trying to get as much thermal mass close to the ground so that in the winter that's going to be slightly warm than the air outside, and in the summer it's going to be cooler than the air outside. And it really does work. I don't have to use air conditioning as long as I have the windows sealed up, which is what's going on right now. I've gone back into cave mode for my live streaming and for getting ready for summer. So yeah, the deal with these is, and where would one start learning about DSP? Programming in C or fooling with people's open source stuff. The parts that I am no good at helping you with are in getting things to compile, because I have enormous trouble with that kind of stuff. As far as the DSP, if you can already program, come to a live stream and ask. I'll talk you through some of that stuff. But the stuff with the householder matrices, this is what I'm doing for all the previous ones. And this is the one where, like for this one, you can do a 3x3 that is even cheaper than the 4x4. And what happens is you have large numbers of echoes produced from the combination of all these things. But when you have exactly either unity gain or inverse unity gain for the entire feedback matrix, and that's what this is. What this means is you have 4 things and they're going into 4 other things. And so every single output gets a copy of every single input. They divide them up. And you can do that with the 4x4 householder matrix, never changing the gain of anything by doing this. And similarly to MV, similarly to old lexicon reverbs, if you never change the gain of everything, then there's a certain clarity that comes through because you've not done anything that incurs quantization for any of the values. If you do a 5x5, you get way more. Like I said, this will get you like 4,000 echoes off of one input, and this will get you 9 million. And this will get you, I don't even know. But notice something about this, that we've got the unity gain outputs, but then for the 6x6 matrix, this diagonal row that are positive feedbacks are double the output. So technically that'll actually sound just as good as the inverted -1. But not all the echoes are the same volume anymore. Everything's being shifted and changed to produce the result of this. And so therefore, the 5x5 matrix is going to emphasize some of the echoes louder than others. And that's no longer as consistent as the 4x4. And the 6x6 matrix, well, man, some of the echoes are 6 dB louder than the others. And so it's not making an efficient use of the really, really unbelievably large number of echoes. That's why the 4x4 has its place, and that's why the 5x5 is also a kind of compromise. I think that leads to having it sound like it has less echo density, even though it has way more. But yeah, we'll cut out of there. So, a couple of quick questions. Alterec, how would you feel about people using your plugin to rebuild things like Ableton Effect Racks or an FX pedal and putting it behind a Patreon paywall? You mean an FX pedal that is a physical object? You should not be worried about paying for a physical object that you may can sell to people. As far as Ableton Effect Racks, what I would say is it's a little bit like the Rack and Cardinal situation. When you do stuff that tries to force people to pay for other open source stuff that was already out there, you might find that there's a PR hit to that people might not like it. After all, people have reacted very poorly to Andrew Belt, even though he has done pretty much all the work of building VCV Rack. He's deeply, deeply involved in it. He's not replaceable. But people react poorly when he puts stuff behind a paywall. Similarly, if you do that, I'm not going to fight you. I won't necessarily be happy about it, depending upon how you manage things. But at the same time, I couldn't really fault you for the choice. I would say if you need to make open source bring you the salary of like a working database programmer or web programmer, you probably shouldn't be doing that because it's going to be like pulling teeth. It's going to be really hard. I don't get paid as well as a database programmer, but I get to focus on stuff that interests me. You get paid more as a normal regular world programmer because you're having to do stuff that you don't care about and that isn't interesting. So running with like an open source repository like the Airwindows codebase, as much as I facilitate people being able to do anything they want with it, and it's MIT licensed specifically so you can do that if you want to. You have to credit me. But it's not GPL'd unless I also parallel license it as being GPL. So how would I feel about doing stuff? Well, if it's simply downloadable stuff, I would feel like, yeah, I don't know if you necessarily want to do that. It's not necessarily going to help you as much as you think. Especially if you're not doing a lot of curating or whatever. Like, if you are up against me making the original plugins and somebody like Bacon Paul, who is doing things like bringing every plugin to new platforms, and easily and simply, you probably need to bring something distinct to that. Like, do it your way. If you do it your way sufficiently, then I would say people might understand what you're on about. Mm-hmm. And Mel, as far as what's special about Steely Dan's mixing mastering work, oh yeah, people know. I know some of that. I put out a video that is on the subject of, I think it was Do It Again. Essentially, it's just well-crafted stuff. There are particular things on this deal. Let's switch back to the freaking main scene because I'm continuing not to actually get down to coding. But there's a worthwhileness to that as well. I might have to stop the stream and then do my coding. Steely Dan has always been interested in good sound. They had some very talented people who were willing to experiment with their sounds, and so as a result of like minor comments and their willingness to invest money in what they do, we know some things about what's happened. For instance, they fairly quickly got away from a sort of rock band recording situation from Can't Buy a Thrill and started isolating and studioifying things. By the time of Katie Lied, and I don't know the exact tempo of these things, although I do know that Walter Becker has been using DI bass since a fairly early time. They always were very interested in getting more of a studio sound. Around the time of Pretzel Logic, they went studio only because they did not like live performance that much, nor were they all that good at it. What they do is better suited to just being really perfectionistic in the studio. By the time of Katie Lied, they put on the literal albums stuff about how they're using expensive Neumann microphones and individual microphone equalization is frowned on. That did not continue. That's an experiment that they did in Katie Lied, but it teaches you certain things. Because bear in mind, one of the reasons I chose the mixer that I use, this Heritage Audio mixer, no individual equalization on the tracks. It's just a gain and a pan and effect sends. That is similarly to like the console that Led Zeppelin II was made on, also had no equalization on individual tracks. And folks like Jimmy Page liked recording things and getting striking tones out of microphones rather than putting EQs on things. Like rather than using an EQ to take out the bass, he would put a microphone on an amp and then put another microphone a little in a different place and flip the phase. So that's two mics, one of them's out of phase. It's going to cancel more of the lows the lower down the frequencies go. So he's creating a EQ tone through using raw microphone inputs that don't have equalization all over them. That is a distinct way of doing things. Steely Dan was doing this at the time of Katie Lied. They were managing things with microphone placement, and they were managing, the performances and the way they set up the instruments and so on and so forth. And that is a choice, a production choice. Doing that taught them about these things like placement and so on. Because if you always do it by like, what EQ should I get to make it do the thing that I want, then it doesn't really direct you towards getting the signal chain as clean as you can. And that is also there is a documentary that Dave Grohl did called Sound City that's worth watching. And one of the things that they talk about in this documentary is when Sound City was exploding in popularity back in the 70s, they had got this ginormous Neve console. One of the things about this Neve console is that since it was so high quality, they had the capacity of going out, putting a mic on something, going back into the control room, bringing the microphone up, and it already sounded amazing without any equalization. That's actually a power tool. That is a special trick from the studio. You get a signal chain that is so powerful that you don't feel the need to do anything. And extra qualities come through as a result if you're not doing anything. So, Steely Dan went onwards from this point around Katie Lied, where they were exploring how do we maximally get the hi-fi tone from having these very expensive condenser microphones and the signal chain being the way that we want, and never equalizing anything. Well, any rule like that is a limitation. And by the time they got onto the Royal Scam, that had gone out the window. It's absolutely not just expensive Neumann mics and no equalization. That's absolutely not what they're doing on Royal Scam or Asia. By the time of the Royal Scam and Asia, they were absolutely coloring stuff with EQ in the studio. But what entered the picture in the Royal Scam was the FX Oral Exciter. And it may have been a thing on Katie Lied, but it's absolutely a thing on Royal Scam. The sound of it just screams, oh, hey, we found an FX Oral Exciter. Another thing that they were always using was Dolby. That is characteristics of the sound that they've got, and the people they were working with, like Roger Nichols, that is somebody who is very capable of going, oh, here's your secret sauce noise reduction thing, huh? And then exploiting that, fooling with it to get particular tones out of it, which is where we get to my plugin Doubly. I'm going to need to do a version of that where you can adjust the sort of brightness, darkness of it, because that is also something that is on tap. But say around Katie Lied or whatever, and I bet that is also, like, now that I think of it, think of Countdown to Ecstasy. Countdown to Ecstasy sounds like they were working with Dolby and learned how to tweak and adjust it to get the desired sound. And in Countdown to Ecstasy, they had these early versions of Dolby tuned to be kind of darker, because they wanted to have a sonic space that was a sea of blackness and silence from which cool sounds emerged, and so on. Bright, interesting, characterful sounds. And you can tweak Dolby to do that. It's the balance of encode and decode and stuff. Doubly is very much set up to hype and expand sounds rather than dull them. So yeah, what happens with Steely Dan is that you have engineers that are very capable. They're not the only band like that, by the way, because another band that you will notice has amazing sounding albums due to engineers that were really pushing the limits of what you could do is the Grateful Dead. Grateful Dead studio albums are a sonic treat. Certain ones in particular, for instance, when you get to Blues for Allah, that is the sound of really sophisticated compression and probably the, doubly style Dolby with a little extra hype. The album Wake of the Flood, of which I don't like the music nearly as well as Blues for Allah, is like the Countdown to Ecstasy of the Grateful Dead, in that the sonics of that one are a lot more expanded and kind of dull, kind of dark. Whereas Blues for Allah is bright and sparkly and tingly and just has an extraordinary crispness to it. So yeah, I hardly advise, like, if you can get the vinyl record of something like that. There are also things like, remember how I mentioned that recording stuff directly into the board without any equalization or whatever is an approach that you can use? The Grateful Dead were doing that in Live Dead in 1970. The album Live Dead is extraordinary sounding. The sound of it is extremely good. Extremely, extremely, extremely good. Ridiculously good. And the sound of Europe 72 is even better. So that is another band. If you like any of the music that they make, then you can look them up, and it is every bit as good as the sonics of Steely Dan. It's a different set of people. It's Bob Cantor, the folks behind Alembic. You can get these basses, Alembic basses, that came out of the Grateful Dead community, and they are the counterpart to Steely Dan's folks as far as the engineering team. Steely Dan's Roger Nichols, and the Grateful Dead, there were Bob and Betty for mixing, and Cantor, somebody from Alembic, and they also had Owsley Stanley, Bear, pitching wild ideas and not really being able to deliver them. He was the famous acid chemist, and so he was very interested in like thinking up how you could make the audio for the Grateful Dead better than anybody else's. But he didn't necessarily succeed with that. But there were the technicians who were able to deliver on the ideas that he had, and it does come out in the recordings. Anywho, let's go until like 3 or so, and that'll be enough for today. And let's actually take a moment and at least begin some of the actual coding, because this is meant to be a coding stream. And if I go for long enough, everybody will be exhausted and I'll end up talking to nobody there. So we'll try to avoid that. I was going to get into weight first, because I'll tell you what that is. My plan here, and I can do the beginnings of it. Some of it I'm going to need to do, plug in headphones into this little laptop and actually hearing what I'm doing. Right now, I am not sure I have any way of running audio into the stream and hearing it. It's not something I'm willing to deal with today. I might test it a little bit in future and find out whether I can make it work in future, but for today, that's not going to be a thing. But I don't need to do that for what weight's going to be, because weight is going to be a variation off of Holt 2 designed to only add subsonic and deep bass weight of the kind I can get through Holt 2 as purely additive, similarly to some of my reverbs where going up to 50%, all you get is the reverb added to the dry signal without touching the dry signal. Weight's going to be like that. Rather than crossfading between wet and dry, it will be like, here is your bass added stuff, and this is it being included, but you're not changing the tone of anything else, so you can dial in small amounts of it. And there's going to be just a frequency control, and I'm going to work out how to calibrate that to frequencies of the output. So that's going to involve listening to it, looking at the end result on Voxengo span, and dialing it in so that I can say, give me 40 hertz, and you'll get a bump at 40 hertz. And the way this starts is by me opening up weight, which is currently blank and doesn't have anything going on with it, and opening up Holt 2. Because there's another useful thing about when I can identify stuff. Holt 2 is a filtering technique based on Holt, the original filtering technique. And we're going to copy it directly over and then edit it from there. So what I'll do for the end of this stream is do the copying over directly. And the way that it works, it's just this kind of stuff, right? So we can do that, although I don't necessarily need to see when I start out a plugin, I've got this template and it gives me a lot of different options. And so one of the things that I can do is have this be, oh, my arm hurts when I lift it, the same as these. And I'll copy over these names. But then I'll have a bunch of other settings. The 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th, and 10th. And if I need to adjust something like how the frequency dials in, what I can do is use these to tweak it, get a number, build the number into the plugin, and then run with that. So we'll leave all the parameters there. And we'll copy over this, but it's not going to be set up exactly the way that the other one did, because Hold lets you do multiple stages in a particular way. And again, we're going to copy it over directly so I can start with a working version and go from there. I wonder whether I have, no, it doesn't seem as if I have options for this old version of macOS that I do the initial coding on. Doesn't seem to have additional options for audio outs. That's fine. So here's how we start off. This has 5 controls, this has 10. The end result is going to be many fewer controls because that's one of the things I often like to do. I'd like to have it set up so that you get this plugin because you know that you want to add the best sounding bass boost at whatever frequency that you could possibly want. And it will bundle some of the controls together and it will leave a bunch of the controls out and it will do only that which it's supposed to do. And it'll be called wait rather than halt because the idea is you're like, what do I need to do? I need to make this bass drum heavier. How can I do that? What was the name of that algorithm? And so you can't really call it halt. Nobody will remember what that means. But if you go, wait, wait, look at it down at the bottom of the list where those X, Y, and Z plugins are around Verbity. The bottom of the list has the cool stuff, right? Oh, hello. We have an interesting thing going on here. We have a thing here where kparam 3 goes from 0 to 8. That we're not going to end up using it, but I'm going to set it up this way to start with, just so that this matches and I can ensure that I know how the plugin works. Like I'm going to start it up and figure out how to clone the previous plugin and alter it from there. So there we go. We initialize this set of things. Sometimes people use this kind of stuff and do it using arrays, do it using more intelligent programming techniques. I often like to do things in a very primitive way so that everything that you do is completely exposed. It's like very much C rather than C++, or not even, because the stuff that you could use by making arrays and iterating among them is available in just regular C. But I'm choosing not to do that to make it so that it's like unrolling loop, so you see every single thing that happens. And now we're going to take all of this and just literally copy it. Boop. And then from in-frames to process. Boop. One nice thing about these old versions of macOS is you can put a, well, I've forgotten a thing though. Let's save this. And the thing that I forgot is this thing that says wait version H. I need to spell out a subtype. It needs to have its own little ID, otherwise that won't work properly. Oh, I spelled it wrong. GHT. It could have been WHGT, and that would be completely fine, but WGHT. Now, if I compile this, it will not work right away, I don't think. In this old version of macOS, oh, I guess it did. Go figure. And if I do it again, it will do it without any complaints. Some versions of this where if I build it for the first time, it throws all these errors because it needed to compile its own sources first. Like public utility, the computer is compiling all of this stuff too, and then using it for things. Or AU public, AU base. You've got stuff like this. You can go and look at it, but it's not necessarily going to help very much. And it'll say these things. I don't understand any of this stuff. Bits of it, I suppose I do. For instance, OSS status AU base can set max frames const return is initialized question. So what's happening with this, I have a basic understanding of how this works. Return means this thing can set frames. You can go can set frames elsewhere in the code. It will return something. And you are sending it a const. You're doing something with it. I don't know exactly how this is implemented, but the 2 colons there is a C++ism, meaning, you know, out of AU base, this is one of the methods that you can call. Return means give me back something from the result, and is initialized means it's calling another thing. And as a result, the question mark means if the answer is true, give me this. If the answer is false, give me that. So if the presumably if it is initialized isn't true, it gives you the constant of k audio unit air initialized, which is probably a number of some kind. Like jump to definition. So it gives you the number -10849. And that's a constant. So when you say this, you're actually just saying a number. And now I have lost where I was, but maybe I'll be able to find it again. Oh, or maybe I will, maybe I won't. Oh no, I did open a new window. So return is initialized. If it's not, it gives you a number. And if it is initialized, it gives you OS status, no error. And OS status is another something or other. And so you have access to all this kind of stuff. I just don't understand most of it. You can dig through it all. My brain doesn't usually remember these things that well. And then, you know, we're doing these kinds of things. It's using the same techniques that I use in terms of this is what C has. Stuff like switch and case and so on. Switch means take this in, and then the result will be this, 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 or this. These are numbers. Turns out you can look that up and jump to definition of K audio unit property, and that is number 23. So, and you make these by doing a thing called enum, and you spell that out, and that becomes 0 through whatever. Then if you refer to this, you're referring to a integer, because this is an integer. They seem to have skipped them. There's no 7, there's no 9 or 10. But that is not my problem. I'm not worried about that part. And then you can specify those in case statements and not have to look up what the number is. It'll just do it. But what we're doing here is my code. So I think the first thing I'm going to do, before we're even testing it, not that we're going to be able to hear it through the stream, but I think I can test it and be able to hear something out of the laptop speakers, if nothing else. I'm going to render this bit invalid. 8-stage wet-dry control. Well, we're using all the stages for weight. I've decided that although I like having the resonance, which I believe is, yes, the res control, I will have variables where the amount of weight that you add will also start sneaking up the resonance. So the more you add to it, the more you get to like, oh, this really intense, powerful added weight at this frequency, it'll emphasize the frequency more heavily the more you push it. So that will be building res control into the amount of gain in it. But parameter 3, the one that goes from 0 to... Oh, and apparently we're not... Hello? What's going on here? It is claiming that these are not used, but they are. Oh. What on earth is going on there? Did I just do that wrong? Hey, let's go and investigate. Let's see whether Holt has a major bug that needs fixing. If so, that'll be interesting to find out about. Or maybe I just copied and pasted it wrong. Holt 2. Oh, here we go. Okay, so I did that wrong. It didn't break, but this is why you need to check in things like this. I had apparently kept what I had for the H file, the header file. And I'll tell you why this would have worked, but given unexpected results. Reset means take these variables and make them be 0. What's happening here is instead of doing that in this reset method, I'm defining them again. And what that means is each of these were already made to be a variable somewhere in the header file. And what's happening is when we call the reset function, it's defining the same variables twice. There's already one that was there, and then we're defining another one because we made a mistake. As a result, we've defined one, we're not doing anything with it, and then when this closes, when this goes away, reset is finished and it stops being a thing. The ones that we have just defined just evaporate, and the ones that we were trying to update have not been updated. Instead, we wanted this. That takes the variables that we've defined and zeroes them out, because otherwise they could be anything, and that can cause problems. So now that we've compiled that, we're going to go after this place where, remember how kparam 3, I told it to be 8, and I'm immediately going to be updating that so we don't use that bit. Nothing else went to 8, everything was 0 to 1. This stuff is the tone of the sound. Oh yeah, coding is much more complicated, but the coding and doing things like fixing the video on the stream are such different ways of thinking that it can be really overwhelming doing all of them at once. That's why sometimes it takes me a while to get into these things. Hopefully the stream setup can be consistent enough that it will just work next week and I can dive straight into coding. But we do have this, and I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. All this wet dry stuff is for letting you have from 1 to 8 instances of the hold algorithm. It can start with just the 1 and be a very subtle tone shaping, but I found that I got a much cooler sound out of using a lot of resonance and cranking it the heck up so that I was running through 8 stages of it. Because it turns out you can do that. It's actually pretty efficient. But if we're going to do that, there's wasted code in here that I'm not going to be using. So I'm going to strip that out and make it go away. And here's how I do that. Here's what Holt is. It's this stuff going on. It's very simple. And we're using this trend and forecast here. Now I'm trying to think. I guess it said we're defining this here because we're copying the routine at times. I could have put them here. See? Cut. Paste. One of the things that it can be nice to do is, and my brother Dan taught me this one, is define things where you're using them. so that you don't have just weird variables sitting around and you go, well, where do I use that? I don't know. Instead, you define them in the place that you use it. Jeremiah, I don't really code in assembly language, but the way that I code in C is about as similar to assembly language as I can make it. I would not choose to code in assembly language directly unless it's something like maybe WebAssembly, which I have not yet learned. Because then when somebody invents a new processor, like going from Intel to Apple Silicon, this laptop to that laptop, or the Studio, then you have to change everything. Whereas if you're coding in C, you do a compiler and the compiler figures out that stuff. But yeah, I do tend to code C as if it was assembly language. So we've defined this here. We're not going to keep this mention of copying the routine 8 times because I'm not. And remember how I just deleted all this stuff, A wet, B wet? Let's put a space between some of that stuff. I'm also going to be wanting to line this up better. But each of these live in its own little space. I'm also going to need to be updating some of this too. It can't just only be that, because I'm referring to these variables even though I'm no longer making them possible to operate. But I'm going to want to go through every single stage of this for weight, because it'll sound better. And going back, well, first of all, let's select everything and reformat it, right? Format and re-indent. So now everything lines up the way that it's supposed to. Now I need to figure out, since I am never using dry sample for anything, I'm always just, this bit here does not matter. What do I want to do as far as making this do what I want? Well, I guess the answer is fairly simple. I think I can actually just get rid of that. And I'll tell you why. When we run this in hold, let's show you what it does in hold. See how everything is 0 and then hwet is get parameter param3. This is a dry wet control that rather than running stuff through the whole thing and then mixing it with dry, it runs it through successive stages of whatever you're doing and only then goes to dry. So you can have one stage of hold. You can have 4 stages of hold on one control just by gradually increasing it. It starts blending in, like if you had 4 stages and you were going from a half to 3/4, half would be 2 stages and full crank would be 4 stages. So a half to 3/4 means you're going from 2 to 3 stages. And so you do a little dry wet between the 2 and the 3 stages. Yep. And then by the time you reach 3/4, you're directly the output of 3 stages. That's how all of this works. It's a pretty nice little way of dealing with it. And this is what you need to do in order to make that happen. Is you set up these dry wet things and figure out some way of making that work. And the end result is, if you have a large number of on your output, like it's cranked up, it's like 8. It's not less than 1, it's not less than 2, it's not less than 3, it's all the way over to the end. Then hwet minus equals 7, so 8 minus 7 equals 1, so it's unity gain. It will end up multiplying by 1. And then all the rest of them also equal 1. And if you had it be 7, then we only get to this one, and then G equals H minus 6, so the end one is going to be, let's say a middle one. You wind up having the end one to be 0, and then the one where you're at is somewhere between 0 and 1, depending upon where it is. But I'm going on about this, but I really shouldn't, because this is in the code and it works. If you want to do this thing, then you can just copy it. And here's how you implement it. You use this chunk, the 8-stage wet-dry control, or however many stages you want. This is an 8-stage. Other stuff that I've got is fewer stages than that. And then for each one of these, here's your processing. This is the bit that combines it with dry or whatever. Is input sample is the wet-dry control plus whatever your previous one was. And if you're not using the additional stages, they don't get executed. You don't run extra code that you don't need. See you later, Mel. I'm going to be about done pretty soon. Oh, Halt is a low pass, not a high pass. Wait is bringing in something that is heavily low passed in a particular character. So here's what we're doing is, turns out this line of code we can just delete everywhere, because input sample gets the end result of this. And do we need? I think we do need previous sample, but we're not actually using it. So this part we keep because we need it, but this part we never need because this is part of the wet-dry system, and we never need to refer to it because it's always, all of these are going to equate to always on, always 1. So it's always going to be input sample equals input sample. We can just delete that. We don't need it. And so thus we simplify wait going through and deleting this stuff. And then we have a very simple, this is just all additions and multiplies. It's very nice that we have this going on. It might be 8 stages, and you know, it's possible to do things like build this into an array and have just one little line of code called in a loop. And I'm not doing that because I like having some of this stuff be visible, like you see how many things you're doing. But that would be just obvious, so I'm not going to bother with that. Instead, I'll put a little space in here so that it looks like a thing. And now that I have this, I have all of these stages running in rapid succession, just 8 poles of this filtering, always. And then it also might work for modifying this. What I'd want to do is use the Holt plugin to dial in the flavor of tone that I'm trying to do, but you can take something like this, especially seeing as it's so efficient to run. Like, this is not complicated. We don't have any assign, we don't have any transcendental functions. It's purely a really primitive filter calculation. It just happens to be the Holt filter calculation, and it happens to be 8 stages of it, but it's still probably more efficient than a single biquad filter to do this. But it doesn't give you the tone of a biquad filter, it gives you the tone of 8 poles of Holt filtering. And that can have its own quality going on. In fact, I might be able to find like res control here, previous trend, it's instantiating this new each time. We can actually define this in the first instance. So we don't need those separate. It's not always what one would do. So we're going to define them the first time, and then we just keep updating them with each new stage and go from there. We go this many times. I'm wondering whether I want to just consolidate this into an ugly block, because it does have the letters in there, so I can see where each new one starts. I could also use a comment to do that, so maybe I'll do that. So just for laughs, yeah, I like the dashes better. I always like dashes. That's a silly joke, don't you mind me. Deep cut. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stages of filtering, and a little comment. All it does is distinguish where each filtering stage ends. So that can show where that stuff happens, and that's good enough as far as labeling is concerned. And we have gain, we have wet dry. Wet dry uses regular wet, which is interesting. I wonder why. I guess maybe that's from previously. I'm not quite sure. I think what's happening is the dry wet stuff was my poles control, and wet dry is literally regular wet dry, which is relevant to what I'll be doing with it. Although I could always just continue the principle of doing what I'm going to be doing with it and then tuning it later. So gain, I don't have parameter 3 used for anything. So we're going to steal parameter 3, which is now being not used for anything. And we're not going to test for unity gain because I don't actually expect that to be useful, so I'm not going to facilitate it. Sometimes what I do is make it so that if you're running stuff at unity gain, it doesn't do the calculation unless necessary, but I can't imagine it being a thing where you actually have to run it at full crank for any useful purpose. I think I would rather always have people dial it back and have full crank be too much. So therefore we'll always do this input sample times out. And then our dry wet is not actually like this. Instead, our dry wet is like this. We always have full dry on the weight control. It always passes through the audio. It exists so you can take this bass bump and like add it to what you already had without touching what you already had. Minimal processing, doesn't run dry signal through anything. It's just using it and adding it. And so that's what we do, is we multiply input sample times out. That is control 3 now, so I might as well update the H file. You don't do this, you start getting confused by things. So we no longer have that. we'll use the name of it, and we'll blank some of these out. Or, oh, hang on, shouldn't have done that. Now we have only 3 controls. Resonance is going to go away. I'm not going to keep resonance, but that's not happening today. Or if it is, it's not happening right now. It'll happen after I finish streaming. And so we've just changed the names of things. Let's make sure that I changed the param3 to 0 to 1. I did. And we can quit out of there. Go to the build. Drag this into components. And fire up Twisted Wave. And a recent thing like a drum track. Now we're not going to be able to hear anything from that, but it makes a sound. I don't have it piped through into the stream, so that'll be for a future day. But I probably should be able to make the laptop scrunch terribly if I use this effect on it. So, recent effects is not what's been added, it's what's been used, so I do have to look up Airwindows audio units and W for weight. It exists, and if we play, oh, let's take this and put this to 0. That shouldn't default to 1. Frequency is also going to be way too high, so let's drop that right down. Let's crank up resonance. And there we have hold 2, still functional. And we're dropping the frequency down all the way to 0. Actually, no, you can see. I don't have to point the screen at you. You can see on the screen. We see that the low frequency is not kicking up all that high on the screen. I'll scooch it up a little bit. But if we start bringing weight in, now we have a much heavier bass, and it's not affecting the sound through the laptop speakers because the laptop speakers are not capable of reproducing this bass. And I don't have it patched through the stream, so you can't actually hear it, neither can I. But this proves that this is working. And what frequency is going to do is frequency is going to read like 10 to 100. And you'll be able to dial in the frequency that it is. You know what? I could also open a noise. That's a noise. And do an effects stack, which is how Twisted Wave does this, of weight. Now I can get it because it's in recent effects. And following that, span. And this is how I'm going to dial in the frequency control. I'll show you this, then I'm going to go off and like have a sandwich or something. Be done with the day. So we're going to hit play. And we're going to, oh, hello. Oh! Not as easy as that, is it? Let's see if we can see it though. Yeah, we can kind of see it. See that motion? You can kind of see where that shows up. But the deal here is I have disabled the part that will help me do the thing. So let's open this back up again. And for the purposes of this thing, the next thing I'm going to do will involve, hey Gamma, will involve me commenting out a bit. I comment this out, then it is not the working plugin, but it will show me only the output of the filter. And that's how I'm going to dial in the frequency properly. Put the result into components. For our twisted wave, since this is an old version of macOS, it lets me use it immediately. Open up the noise. I did not save my effect stack, so I'll make another one from scratch again. Recent effects, add weight, and add span, and play. So this is how I'm going to be doing it, is I'm going to have the frequency control, and I got to find the spot at which it appears to be like, say, 10 hertz on the very bottom and 100 hertz on the top. So you see where the Voxengo span is showing it? I have resonance fully cranked, by the way. One thing I can do about that is if I cut resonance off, it flattens out a lot. But for this particular one, I want there to be a obvious resonance, and for that to be on the basis of the weight control, like medium weight starting to really bring it in, the resonance starts to increase. And then as we crank it further, the resonance increases even more, and at full crank we'll also have full resonance and be able to bring that in. So you'd be pulling back the level of the boost, but you'd also be pulling back the resonance subtly. And that will help lock in the way that it behaves. It gives it kind of like a log taper. It gives it kind of an exponential taper where you dial it back and it becomes a little gentler. I believe it will stay in the same place when you open the project with a different sample rate, but I'll have to test that. Does Hold 2 do that? If Hold 2 does it, then it will. If Hold 2 doesn't do it, then I may have some adjustment of all of those things, because looking back at this, we're doing overall scale, but we don't seem to. Okay, so this is going to need to be something in, I can see Hold having this, but weight needs to incorporate this value, overall scale. That'll be part of the testing. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a good point. Incorporate. Back to span. So if we use raw Holt, that means it will go all the way to full crank. It's a very simple algorithm. And that means that this is, in fact, a factor of what the ultimate sample rate is. It doesn't stop at just like 20K or whatever. It goes to whatever you tell it to go to. But the end result is going to arrive at a spot where, and I don't know whether 100 is too high. Like, this is a laptop speaker, right? So we're running noise through this, and by the time we've reached 100 for weight, I no longer hear it in the garbagey laptop speaker. So maybe I should be aiming at 200 or so. 20 to 200. If I get to a frequency of 200, it started to broaden out a little bit, but I can kind of hear the rumbling even on the laptop speakers, and that I think is desirable. That's what I'm going to want. So let's bring that in as well. a little note for myself for when I do it. And so we're going to have in a frequency range, or I'm not sure what I'll call it, probably frequency, that goes from 20 to 200. Probably a log taper. Depends on how easy it is to adjust on the VST, because you don't want the entire top of the half of it to be 100 plus. You want the middle range to be sort of a log taper. It's going to be around 40, 60 hertz rather than. And we're going to want to be able to move that bump around, like bottom of around 20. As you can see, it's not boosting the extreme lows all that much, and that's useful. When you're doing a huge weight boost, you want to isolate a particular tonality rather than just having it be everything, even the subsonics gets boosted by this. So we're going to want lots of resonance on there. The maximum resonance is probably going to, the minimum resonance is not going to go all the way to zero at zero. Instead, it's going to dial back until it's like maybe yay much. It'll go back to about 50% maybe. But it's going to keep enough resonance that when you're boosting down real low, it's not also boosting subsonics all that terribly much. And yeah, we will be able to move stuff around and have these heavy subsonic boosts. And that's a lot of dB. That's like, that's a good solid 24 dB boost at that point. And you'll be able to dial it in at whichever frequency you want, because there's a bunch of things that I do, whether that be bass amps, like DI basses. If you throw a Holt on that, you can have a real bass amp type quality by having a fairly resonant boost down at the right place. Kick drums, synthetic kick drums like you could make off a VCV rack, or my drum miking, for instance. And by the same quality, if I was to oh no, wait, I took away the dry, so now you can't hear the drums anymore. I won't need to saturate the low pass. Holt already does that kind of. But here's Holtified, very resonant. This would actually make a pretty decent synth filter, honestly. Bear that in mind for doing things with Holt 2. Holt 2 will do that all day long. You just crank everything out and sweepity swooty. That should be a good candidate for VCV rack stuff. But this is essentially just a huge bass kick being added to this drum recording, which is just a couple of mics split up. So the idea is being able to take this and have a single, like as close as you can get to a one knobber. It'll just also have the dial and the frequency, and single out particular frequencies in the bass of whatever that instrument is. Crank it up until it's real obvious and you know exactly what sound you're creating, and then dial it back until you have a subtle subsonic boost at exactly the frequency that you want. And it will be extremely thumpy, but it will be exactly the thumpy that you need for the particular instrument that you want. And that is the point of the exercise. So I've gone to 3:30. I'm going to call that enough for today's stream. But it's been fun. I got to start on weight. I don't know whether that's going to come out next week. I do have a update on chamber, which is also coming out, which is not actually 9 million echo return thing for the new update on Chamber. The new update on Chamber is letting you dial between the Chamber effect and literally just an echo. And I thought that might be kind of useful, so I have one of those to put out. Going forwards, one of the things I've been talking about is having put out Verbity 2, I have a bunch of ideas about things that I could do with it. And I'd like to do more like specific purpose reverbs because they can be more efficient if you know exactly what you're doing with them. And that's why I think the next target for if the Patreon reaches a certain amount, I think what I'm going to do is I'll go, if I can get back up to a $2,000 a month from the like $1,800 or whatever that I've got, it's not the huge, it's not like I'm saying, give me $8,000 a month for doing the thing. But I feel pretty confident because I'm already very strongly tempted by this. If I can get up to that point, I'll get a Bricasti. That's an ungodly expensive reverb thing, but I use that. I use a rack mount reverb in my setup. It would stomp and demolish the mini verb. It would obliterate the mini verb as far as tone quality is concerned. So that can be, and the thing is, if I have a Bricasti, I can go and start trying to do Airwindows versions, black box Airwindows versions of things like the particular room. They've got like, wood room and cathedral and stuff, and they're all just utterly pristine, but handling things properly with some tricks that I think I can bring to the equation. I think I can do my own versions of some of these sounds and without actually taking any of Casey's code, or he's pretty cooperative as far as talking about code, but he doesn't give away all of his secrets. He talks about things like the feed forward topology, and that's what I'm using. So it's all to the good if I make stuff that doesn't exactly clone anything out of Bricasti, but if I can make stuff from building on what I've got already that fulfills the same basic role in depth, texture, and tone of specific Bricasti patches, I would say those would be a pretty good set of plugins for everybody to have. And I could have them be like distinctly mine so that it's not like a ripoff or anything. And I would probably continue to use the Bricasti because it's a hardware device and I like doing analog mixing. Like the MIDI verb here is patched into the analog mixing board. And I've actually got some inductors and filtering on the outputs of it as well to sort of further color it in a way that doesn't have to be done in the digital domain. I wouldn't have to do that with the Bricasti reverb effect, but if I got one of those, I could start trying to emulate particular patches in it. Not with any access to the internal sounds of it, not with any access to the code, nor would I want to. He gets to have his own thing. It's really expensive to get one of those, and by all means, keep doing your thing. But if I can do free open source plugins, and my targeting towards trying to make them sound better involves going, oh, this wooden room seems pretty cool. What do I need to do in order to make that happen? I can live stream it, be experimenting with it, and I can try to do sort of my take on it using my own tools and techniques. And I would share the result, and that could be kind of fun. Who knows? Maybe I would do something publicly visible in coding streams, and maybe I would come up with something that Casey had not thought of, which is not likely. But supposing I did, then he'd be able to incorporate that in his next thing, and everybody would benefit. So we'll see. Anyways, we'll talk to you later, and I am going to say goodbye to the stream. So